This is the Cloud Ace podcast, bringing you the latest in cloud security through captivating chats with fascinating cybersecurity experts who are leaving their mark on the industry. Cloud Ace is brought to you by the SANS Institute and hosted by SANS fellow Frank Kim. And now, prepare for departure. We are cleared for takeoff. Here's your captain, Frank Kim.
Hello and welcome to the SANS Cloud Ace podcast. With us here today, we have Mike Melo, who is not only the CISO, but also the head of IT leading up the entire technology program at LifeLabs. Mike, thanks so much for joining.
Hey, Frank, thanks for having me.
All right. Hey, well, let's go ahead and dive right into it. And, I like to start these conversations starting with a little bit of personal history. Can you tell us a little bit about hey, yourself, where you come from, and maybe how that wound up helping you get into security overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in cybersecurity almost 15 years now. I'm based in Canada. And for the last 5.5 years, I've been with LifeLabs, transforming their cybersecurity practice, and now also their IT services practice, right? Which includes the data center services, the end user services, ITSM, all the fun stuff of IT. Went to school for not necessarily security engineering, but did a lot of networking and software development work at school. Came up through kind of the security engineering practices and architecture, then got into security leadership and really kind of focusing in now on post-breach transformational stuff.
Nice. Now, back in the day, did you always know that you wanted to get into technology specifically?
No, actually, so I was a bit of a jumper. I kind of bounced around a couple ideas. Originally, I was wanting to get into science. So I went to Guelph University to study for virology and ultimately just didn't like it. And then went into music, wanted to pursue my passion of music. As you can see, I have many guitars behind me. But ultimately landed on really trying to pursue what I thought was going to be an up and coming and long sustaining career in cybersecurity, which seems to be fairly accurate these days with the continued growing threats that we face every day.
Wow. Okay. Wait, now, did you say that you originally studied virology? Is that the study of viruses?
Human viruses, yes. So I almost transposed that from the human side to the digital side now.
Nice. Now, hey, before we get more into cyber, you mentioned being a musician and, the guitars. Tell the audience a little bit about kind of your journey in music and where you started and kind of what you do today.
Yeah, so I started probably when I was around 15. I played for about 7 years, self-taught, and then went and got a teacher right around the end of it, and then ended up going to Mohawk College for a year for guitar performance. Enjoyed it, but really wanted to focus on something different for my career. Fast forward 13 years, I was actually stopped playing guitar after that, and fast forward 13 years, got back into it. And most recently, actually, I was accepted into Berklee College of Music for guitar performance. So I will be doing Berklee online in my abundance of free time that I have with work and being a father, but finding some time to obviously continue following a passion and a dream of mine.
That's incredible. Wow, that's multiple careers there. That's cool that you can do that while you're doing the day job as well. But it's very nice to hear you circling back to your original passion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for it.
Yeah. Now, is that a basketball on the back shelf? What is that back there?
It is. It is. I would say it's a basketball from a Warriors game where I was in San Francisco and I got to meet Steph Curry, and Steph actually signed the ball for me in the background. So that was a really momentous occasion earlier this year. That so I like to have it on display. I admire his tenacity and just his humbleness. So I kind of keep it as a reminder of that and try to apply that in my everyday.
That is awesome. I mean, I'm here in the Bay Area and a Warriors fan, a lifelong Warriors fan before they got good many decades, when they were bad many decades ago. So that is very, very cool. So, being from Canada, I guess you're not a Raptors fan though?
Everyone asks me like, who's your team? Originally from Toronto, everyone assumes, you must be a Leafs fan, must be a Raptors fan. I'm just a fan of good sportsmanship, good sports. So it doesn't really matter. I don't truly align to any one team. I do thoroughly enjoy the Raptors. Been to many of those games. Enjoyed lots of their playoff runs. But yeah, the Steph Curry moment was a big one for me. I've always liked what the Warriors have been doing the past decade, but I'm just overall a big sports fan.
Yeah, now I still got to keep asking about this. Now, how did that come to pass? Like, how did that meeting come about where, hey, you're meeting him and, getting an autograph ball?
Yeah, so a colleague of mine, they brought me out to the game. They're friends of Steph Curry and his investment group as well, Penny Jar, and so we got to go backstage, meet them after the game, Bryant Barr and Steph Curry, and just got to spend some time and just hang out and talk. And yeah, it was a pretty cool moment. Again, super surreal because he's one of the most humble people I've ever met with. And for somebody of that fame and stature, it's always it's one of those moments where you're scared to meet your heroes, but it was actually really cool getting to talk to him. And we're basically the same age. Our birthdays are a couple days apart, so we kind of clicked on that.
So cool. I got to tell my daughter, she's going to be envious for sure. Yeah. Now, hey, let's circle back to the day job here. Earlier, we talked about how you're both the head of IT services and security. And if I remember correctly, when you started at LifeLabs, you were started in security specifically, and the CISO there, and the IT and taking over IT came a little bit later. Is that right? And if so, how did that transition occur? Why did that happen?
That's correct. So I came into LifeLabs to help build out their cybersecurity practice. Became CISO about a year after I started, with the other CISO kind of exiting and retiring, and led them through their post-breach transformation. Really built out their cybersecurity practice holistically, rebuilt a lot of the customer and stakeholder trust. And then just over 2 years ago, we had another member of the IT practice retired, and he was at the time the director of IT, and I took over the IT shared services practice to really help. I would say the main mandate there was to really, one, transform the IT shared services practice and modernize a lot of it, but then also help drive synergies between both cybersecurity and IT. Assuming most watchers of this podcast can definitely appreciate and understand the tensions that can rise between the two groups. So it was definitely I would say a challenge, but something that I felt passionately about, and that we've been able to really help overcome and drive both practices to a much higher level of maturity and success.
Very cool. I see more and more security leaders, CISOs, taking on IT and CIO responsibilities as well over time. Of course, I guess that's the reward for doing the good job is, of course, more work. And you mentioned transformation in IT, and you said that you've been at LifeLabs for about 5 years. So I'm sure the security program has changed a lot during that time. How would you describe how the security program specifically has evolved? And looking back, kind of what's one thing that maybe you might say was maybe a mistake, and another thing that's a lesson learned that everybody should be doing?
Yeah, I think that, when you look back at the 5.5 years I've been with the company, it's definitely changed from when I was there early days, right? Um, I would say though that we are now more focused towards proactive security versus reactive security. So, and a lot's changed in the industry in the last 5 years, right? So we were historically more of a on-prem data center driven organization. Over the past 5 years, we've been transforming more into the cloud first initiatives. So that really has taken us on a different journey in security, and obviously building specific for the cloud. As we know that, not everything is transposable in a lift and shift type model, right? And that's not something that we necessarily subscribe to either, is that we purpose build for the cloud, right? Where it makes sense. And I would say, the big thing though is historically being reactive to now more proactive, right? We're threat intelligence led. We're performing threat hunts. We're obviously evolving our maturity in all of our practice and controls and validating that, right? So I think a big part of this is, yes, purchasing solutions, building process, integrating into the different technology stack, but a big component is testing the effectiveness of your tooling and your processes, right? So, and I'm not just talking about pen testing. We go a little bit further in our steps. We do advanced purple teaming. We even are getting to red teaming as well, given the fact that, I think we're at a good and high enough maturity state in our capabilities that we can gain a lot of benefit from that, right? And so I think that that's a very core to our practice, is that now we are very focused on how effective are we, and can we drive greater efficiencies or tweak controls that are going to be beneficial to us. And that's obviously backed by a lot of threat intelligence and data that we require in order to kind of stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, very cool. A lot of cool capabilities that you've built over time. Can you share, how big was the team when you started? What does it look like now in terms of size and structure overall? You mentioned the different capabilities. And then, finally, what is it that threat intelligence and that hunting that you mentioned, what do you see as the most impactful in terms of cloud specific related threat intelligence?
Yeah. So, early days when we started, probably 3 on the cybersecurity practice team dedicated to it, obviously with some help with co-source managed service providers as well. Over the past 5.5 years, we've scaled and grown that out. And obviously, when you go through transformation, there's a big kind of bubble up of contractors that we need to help accelerate through transformation, and also different skill sets that we require for transformation that we may not necessarily require on the downslope of the transform, right? So then we look at how do we build that organizational chart for sustainment model over the years. So right now we're operating with about 18 full-time employees dedicated to cybersecurity. We are heavily co-sourced through managed service providers for threat intelligence, threat hunting, the SOC, EDR management aspects and capabilities, even some of our security awareness stuff with Proofpoint. And I'd say that it's a journey when you're going through transformations, and how you get there, and what your organizational design is going to look like at the end of the day. So that's kind of where we're at now from an organizational design perspective. And I would say, from a cloud security focus area, a big proponent for us is obviously that external barrier, right? That first passage of attack surface is very critical for us, ensuring we have, our WAFs tuned and refined and continuously validated and tested. We run numerous threat hunts throughout the year with an external security provider as well. And, I would say just having a overall framework and cloud focused design towards security practice is prudent, right? So, we talk about cloud security trends like zero trust and the SASE frameworks of today. And I think that, you really need to reside and land on some sort of framework of what are your best, practices that you want to leverage for your design. Luckily enough, I'm also the owner of the IT shared services. So I kind of shape what cloud infrastructure and tenancies we get to operate in. So a big challenge for us is always, how do we manage the cloud sprawl as it relates to our cybersecurity capabilities in the cloud, and really focusing on our cloud native security applications to help us get there. So lots of cool, innovative things happening in the cloud security space. But yeah, I would say a big proponent for us is having very specific cloud threat intelligence and threat hunting capabilities that we leverage on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In addition to those security specific items that you mentioned, you mentioned org design a couple of times, and with you leading both areas, where have you seen that there's the most synergy? Of course, as we know, there, as you said, there's going to be that tension between security and IT and operations and so on. But where, certainly, hey, you taking over IT shared services, there's going to be, the value that you've seen in terms of kind of the principles that IT wants to operate with, the things that they're trying to achieve. What's resonated the most? Has it been that, the supporting their architecture? Is it developer velocity? Is it cost control? What have you seen that connects the dots the best between security and IT?
Yeah, I would say the architecture side for sure. So the security architect actually reports directly to me, with a dotted line over into the architecture group, right? We found that that has worked tremendously, works well with the rest of the architectural group. So there's a lot of synergies being driven there. And then additionally, I would say between security and our ITSM practice itself, because we instantiated cybersecurity practice as a service-oriented model for the organization. So there are services that you subscribe to in the organization. Having a mature practice around service delivery for cybersecurity and having that interwoven into the offerings of our ITSM practice have been very fruitful. And we are continuously and obviously always trying to improve our synergies between both end user services and data center services. Now, generally have heavy contentions around new security policy impacting end users, new security policy or vulnerabilities and threats driving patch requirements. Those are usually the two of the biggest problem areas that we see between cybersecurity and IT. How do we get to a successful outcome? So we've focused a lot of our initiatives and time in that as well, especially when we look at the end user services around organizational change management for cybersecurity practice, right? As much as we want to be perfectionists, and there's a I would say theoretical good way of doing security, there is a real way of doing security, and usually it has some sort of interface with an end user. So we focused a lot of our time and attention to driving effective organizational change management to ensure that people are adopting our solutions, creating a better security culture in the organization.
Great. With how much the team has grown over the years, and you mentioned doing the shift from the traditional legacy on-premise type of approach to a cloud-first approach, how do you find people, train people, hire people with this mindset in mind and with that cloud security experience?
Yeah, it's not without hardship. It's challenging, right? It's and again, you have a journey and a life cycle with people too, right? I would say that, our industry as a whole is very fast paced and very challenged with the amount of talent or the lack of talent out there for us to tap into. So it's a bit of a balance between growing and buying. So building or buying. And, we have a very strong co-op program at LifeLabs. We bring in usually around 5 co-ops each year. And bring them through our entire program. They get cross-trained in various different functions like GRC, control mapping, assurance practices, and then also over into the engineering and analyst work as well. So it's a very holistic practice, and I'm very passionate about that. So is my team, because most of us came up through some sort of co-op practice or program to get into the industry. Another big part is we are actually a heavy supporter of SANS, right? I've been a SANS graduate for the certification programs for many certificates. So most of my team, I feel strongly about I would say, effectiveness of the SANS training and also the teachers behind it, right? And the material itself, right? It's very well lived through the industry, through practice, and through years of experience. So we have I would say, a healthy training budget for people to continuously upskill and ensure that they are developing their own career. And I would say the other big element as you kind of go through this transformation, right? It was really a balance between, hiring for the right skill that we needed at the time, or hiring for the right skill that we need into the future, and growing that capability with people. And how do you look at retention, right? We've come up with some strategic ways with our HR group on how to retain talent, and obviously a big part of that is just creating a very healthy culture and desire to work here in the security practice. So we have a pretty well-known reputation, at least in Canada, for people wanting to come work with our team, work in our program, because we are getting to leverage exciting technologies, and also it's a lot of fun.
Great. Speaking of those technologies, you mentioned tools and the associated process a little bit earlier ago. And for cloud specifically, kind of one of the biggest cloud security tool categories is CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management. And it's kind of getting to the point where, that's kind of your cloud vulnerability scanner, if you will. Almost everybody needs some sort of CSPM type of solution. But there's also another sister category called DSPM, Data Security Posture Management, not just looking at the infrastructure and corresponding configurations, but looking at the data and its associated configurations and where it lives. Now, Mike, I think you're probably the only person I know that has bought and deployed a DSPM before doing a CSPM. Can you talk about why that was the case, how that came about, and how you think about that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a question I get quite a bit. When I meet with a lot of DSPM companies, because they generally, the first rule of thumb or the first question I get asked, "What's your CSPM?" And I think that one just came before the other, right? I think that at the time it made a lot of sense that if you look at the trends of breaches, a lot of misconfiguration breaches in the cloud, things that were just left unencrypted or default creds, just silly things like that, right? Which are very easy to happen, right? And then you look at the flip side of the coin, which is DSPM, right? So if we really take a step back and look at what the trend of the industry has been, and I'd say that we're heavily focused on more resiliency and impact of breach rather than the timing of breach or that a breach will occur. I think that we've kind of agreed to a narrative as an industry as a whole that breaches are pretty much inevitable. It really depends on now your resiliency model to reduce the impact of breach so that it's hopefully not as material as it may be. And I think that that is where DSPM really shines. So if you look at the CSPM kind of model or mantra, it's really around just posture management of cloud config. So are you deploying things correctly? I would say that that's more of a commodity service that isn't super difficult to solve. And I think there's a lot of cloud native tools that already give you some of that capability. It may not be as refined or in detail as, the Orcas or the Wiz of the world, but, there's a lot of, self-use tools in Azure and in AWS and Google that you can definitely leverage to help with your cloud posture management. Some of the vulnerability products out there as well also offer stuff like that. So we've kind of just naturally leveraged some of those free value add type tools to keep us in check, and then also our penetration testing, red teaming, all of that as well. And through obviously good design practices in the beginning with our architectural teams and the SOPs we create, we've been able to foster a good I would say infrastructure validation and deployment practice. So my focus was more so on the data side, is that, look, at the end of the day, if I get breached, I get breached, but I need to understand, well, what's the impact of that breach? And that's always relevant to data, not to my infrastructure. If someone breaches or shuts down a bunch of laptops, not as big of an issue. If it's an archival database, not as big of an issue. Obviously, if it's a patient database in the cloud that gets locked down or whatever the case may be, more important issue. But that's always data driven. Infrastructure is just an abstraction layer to that. So in my mind, DSPM is truly the anchor point of, I would say, cloud security practices right now where it should be. So my narrative and thought process was, look, I want to find the best DSPM product out there, rather than what we're seeing right now is that, yes, we have numerous DSPM products flooding the market because I think everyone appreciates and realizes how important DSPM is. But the challenge you're seeing is that you have all of these CSPM companies that are just kind of spinning up a DSPM type product. They were never really designed with that practice intention in mind. So my focus was, I want to buy a DSPM product that's specifically purpose built for DSPM. And so that's the practice that we went with. And it's not to say that we won't get into the CSPM space in the future, but if I had a decision to make, which I did, it was going to be DSPM is going to drive greater value for me in contextualizing and determining where all my data sets are in the cloud. and what I need to protect in a prioritized fashion, rather than trying to boil the ocean of infrastructure related challenges or configuration challenges, which I could be focusing on in the completely wrong areas because I don't have that data contextualization from DSPM.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned that CSPM is becoming or could become commoditized, because the current generation of CSPM providers, the two most popular, as you mentioned, are Orca and Wiz. And depending on how you count, you can say that maybe that's the third generation of CSPM solutions. The first generation, which was I don't know, about 5-ish years ago or so, that has largely become commoditized, and the equivalent functionality is now in various open source projects. And then there was another generation in the middle there with a little bit more tie into kind of DevOps and the engineering approaches. But, the current generation, right, had that speed to market, time to value in terms of finding those scans. But to your point, right, it really is just a lot of misconfigurations. And a lot of times I find that security teams, lots of people in security teams and CISOs themselves are a little bit confused by this alphabet soup of acronyms and terms associated with cloud security. You mentioned zero trust, you mentioned SASE, security access service edge, but CSPM, DSPM, there's CIEM, there's CNAP, there's CWPP. How do you explain it to your team in terms of, hey, well, where should we actually focus given this big alphabet soup? How do you break it down to make it a little more simple?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard even for us CISOs to keep up with all the trends and the acronyms. That's why I like to stay close to what's happening in the industry. I like talking to analysts. I like talking to fellow CISOs in the different CISO communities I'm a part of, to really get a good understanding of, what are we seeing as what's trending, what's coming up, what's happening, what's actually working. But I think the biggest thing that I do with my team is sitting down, and we do security technology road mapping. So we built out a cybersecurity practice model for the next 3 years, and we're still working through some of that. But that is the focus and intention, right? I have to, take what I'm getting from the industry and bring it into my team, and then it's also an open forum for my team to bring in their feedback and their things, right? It's one thing for me to help drive and shape the security technology strategy, but I really heavily depend and rely on my security engineers and practitioners, right? Is that, they're in the thick of it. They're also with their colleagues understanding tangibly, how does this technology work? What's happening in other organizations? Is it effective? Is it difficult to manage? All of these have different factors in weighing out a decision on our journey and path for a security technology strategy. So, we have a pretty open forum and dialogue for healthy conversation around these types of things. And we do kind of almost like show and tells or lunch and learn type things with the team to educate them on new technologies. We have a fairly strong practice around proof of value, proof of concept technologies as well, to also help understand what some of these up and coming products are, and how they work, and how they work inside of our organization and practice, right? And we've had to develop an effective process around what that looks like, because teams can get overwhelmed with proof of concepts. And are you truly validating and testing products adequately enough before you make a decision to purchase or provide advice on, if it wasn't the right decision for you at that point, why and what could be better? I think that all kind of helps encompass and create this learning environment for the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. You're one of the most innovative CISOs that I know, in the sense of always kind of trying to keep your finger on the pulse of what's the latest technologies and the latest approaches and the latest tools that are out there, like you were saying. And, you talked about proof of value and proof of concept, maybe bringing in a more established player, or maybe somebody that's a little bit newer, an earlier stage startup, and kind of validating, does the solution actually work? Does it do what they say that it's supposed to do? And that's something that I've tried to do with teams in the past, where I try to allocate some smaller percentage of time, 10, maybe 20% of some portion of the team's time, to doing those types of investigations. Now, to be honest, it was varying degrees of success that I've had, because, as you kind of mentioned, teams get inundated with the day-to-day, distracted with all of the work that needs to get done. And you talked about that process and setting up kind of that structure. Can you talk a little bit more about how do you drive that innovation within the team while making sure that they've got time and space to get the day-to-day job done?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's I would say creating like that buffer shield for them, right? To be able to allocate time adequately to ensure that we are validating that these technologies do work. I would say that the process workflow that we came up with was super critical for our success, right? So we have different points of ideation. So it could come from me, it could come from the security team, could come from our GRC practice of, hey, we have control gaps here. We need to find something that validates this and remedies it. And then it goes through multiple different phases of use case development, timeline allocation, estimation of resource, and then we do the resource mapping and piece to that. There are some times that we tell vendors like, hey, like I need something, next year. I need to start looking at it this year. I need something in 2 years, but we're not certain as to how this technology is up and coming. Let's start looking at it now, right? But I think the underlying or the underpinning to the success of that is that we have this strategy, this long-term strategy of what we're looking at planning out. So we can kind of get ahead of some of these things. Now, some things come hot and heavy, right? As we look at trying to innovate, trying to keep up with, new technologies, new capabilities. I would say though that it's a conversation where I will go investigate a lot of the times with new product companies. The security conferences are great for doing that. I'm a big fan of RSAC in San Francisco because I love the sandbox innovation area, right? I get introduced to all these amazing new companies that are startups, really kind of challenging the status quo and trying to do something new and innovative. So that's always really exciting to check out. And you can kind of blitz through a lot of this if you effectively manage your time at these conferences to really get a good landscape or lay of the land on what's going on. I would say that at that point, I would then go and validate the product, make sure it lines up to what our strategy is, some of the outcomes and goals I have in mind, and then I introduce them to the team if I think that it's a viable product with the right outcomes for us, and that my team has the appropriate time for it. So again, I kind of act as a bit of a buffer for my team in any sort of innovative practice, but we generally try to allocate at least, I would say that 15% bracket of focus on proof of value time throughout the year, because it is one thing to always be focusing again on that reactive stage. Again, we have to be more proactive, and so that's where we've definitely allocated the right amount of time to ensure that we can identify these new technologies and validate them, that it is something that's coming, and maybe we don't get it right away. Maybe we validate and say, okay, let's circle back in 12 months. Let's do a quick market reevaluation to see where things are at, and then we procure a solution. And obviously, we work through all of our supply chain and sourcing teams and a lot of their help through a lot of this.
Yeah, that's great. That's also great that you get them involved so early in the creation of that security roadmap, that technical roadmap, because it's got benefits for the team, your program, the company overall, but benefits for them personally as well in terms of, hey, to be honest, they're probably not going to stay at LifeLabs forever. Eventually people do move on, and, that gets them ready for whatever the next thing may come as in terms of being introduced to those kind of cutting edge cyber and cloud capabilities.
I agree. I do have a good track record thus far at LifeLabs. So we have only lost 2 people to resignation in the 5.5 years I've worked there. So I'm quite proud that we've created a team where we have a lot of growth and development in our group, and people have stuck around. But again, my philosophy is always I want to encourage people to be better, be the best version of themselves, learn as much as they can, and just flourish in the industry, whether that's with us or outside. I'm happy to support that, but I obviously treat them well enough that, and they want to stay. And that's kind of been demonstrated in our retention capabilities at the company.
Man, that's an amazing retention rate, right? Congratulations. That's great. Yeah. Do you have any open recs right now?
No, we've closed them all, unfortunately. I'm sorry, Frank.
Yeah. Hey, the before we switch gears here a little bit, I want to ask you. So we talked about a lot of things, different processes, capabilities, how you run the team and build the team and give opportunities. What are you most excited by in cybersecurity or the cloud security space overall?
So what am I most
Yeah.
excited by? Huh. Okay. So I would say we've already kind of talked about it, but like DSPM is a big thing I'm passionate about right now. And I think the main reason for that is because it's almost like we found the lost treasure. Like we've been on this treasure hunt of how can we do better security in the cloud. And this is we've hit the holy grail, I think, of security technologies that are really allowing us to rapidly assess our cloud security posture when it comes to that data element, right? It's pretty incredible if you think about it, right? Like we've looked at the history of data classification methodologies and tooling, and nothing out there has been super successful in the cloud environment. One, based on speed, and two, based on accuracy. And from there, where do you even go? Right. I think that, most organizations have long struggled to do effective data loss prevention programs because of the inability for data classification tools to really drive, I would say, great accuracy and speed. And so for us, at least for me, I think that this is a total game changer, the DSPM space, because not only do we get to index through data at a very high speed through samplings, we're able to get a pretty great quality, accurate depiction of what data exists out there. And so, I've been in a lot of different road mapping sessions with various DSPM companies, and like it's not moving fast enough for me. I want it to go so much faster because I see all the amazing things and incredible intentions that these companies have that they can lead us to a very strong data security practice in the cloud. Which, why do we need that? Well, we had most companies had a pretty good data security practice, I would say, on premise, right? We had greater controls over database access. Like there was just this kind of traditional means of how do you provision access to data, how do you get access to data, where can you store it? All of those things were well defined constructs, and I would say a very repeatable practice over the past couple decades. When you moved into the cloud, now everyone is just standing things up. You can spin up, spin down. Like it's a very agile environment. You're trying to empower your DevOps program. How do you keep up with all that pace of play? And then on top of it, how do you manage financially the cost and overhead to it, right? So one of the big things that we're doing right now is a FinOps practice for our entire cloud environment. And that doesn't just focus on financial operations because it has tertiary benefits around, Terraform type automation. So we developed a full SRE program around creating greater automation. How do I stand things up? And really driving security into that is a huge component. But I think the biggest thing for us is, where are you creating data? Where are you storing it? For how long? And how can I secure it? So that is always going to be the main construct, I think, for any CISO, is that how do I secure my data? Because that is where you find the impact of breach. And reducing that is going to make us and our organizations more successful in securing our customer information, in securing any sort of IP or any of that type of information. It's the most prudent asset that we have as an organization, and I think that that's the most excited spot that I'm seeing right now is the DSPM space.
Well said. All right. Well, hey, with that, let's go ahead and switch things up a little bit. Let's go ahead and move on to our reverso question here and give you an opportunity to switch things up, put on the interviewing hat, and ask me any question that you'd like.
All right. I just want to say this is like such a cool concept that I get to be kind of in your shoes now. So, Frank, one question for you is, if you could do it all over again, like your career, do you think you would follow the same exact path, or would you follow a completely different career path, or maybe just a different path in your current career?
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think an element of this has come up on prior episodes, but not asked in exactly the same way. And to be honest, I don't know. I was one of those people, I'd always been interested in technology and, taken CS classes and knew how to program and those things. But, I had no idea. It was literally, I don't know, maybe a month or two before graduation. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And I was at about a month ahead. I was like, I guess I need to get a job and pay for these student loans and pay for my apartment and things like that. And it was definitely in retrospect. Of course, there's that famous Steve Jobs quote from his commencement address at Stanford, right? You can only connect the dots looking backwards, not looking forwards. And it was just part of it was just dumb luck. Actually, hey, when I came out of school, it was the kind of the height of the dot-com boom, and tech jobs were falling off trees. And for somebody with no real work experience, other than being a teller at a bank and other working at a comic book store and other jobs like that I had, no real tech experience, kind of more academic experience in terms of development and software engineering and so on. So I just lugged into a technology job and I didn't know where it would go. And I didn't start in security. So the common thread, though, when I look back at everything, is that I always love just learning and geeking out about things, and security is definitely that space where it's a never-ending journey of constant learning, whether it be traditional network, whether it be endpoint, whether it be data protection. Now it's whether it be cloud. Now whether it be AI related and how that's gonna change things. So definitely, I feel like I fell into the right area for kind of my personality in terms of always wanting to geek out about something. And then, but I also when I was graduating, I also had a choice of, hey, I always felt I wanted to go into education in some form or fashion. So I thought about going back and getting my teaching credential and teaching high school. And in retrospect, it's a good thing that I didn't, because to be honest, I don't have the personality, I think, for dealing with kids as a full-time career. And so now to happen to lug into, being involved with SANS and teaching with SANS now for a long time, getting into quote unquote education in that way, right? I think that also kind of fits. So I think, long story short, directionally, hey, it all worked out and it landed where it was supposed to, but I had no plan whatsoever. So I can't really say what my plan should be. But I'm curious, Mike, I want to ask you, we talked about at the beginning your love for music. If you could go back, do you think you would do that differently too?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think that I think everything happens for a reason. Like, I'm a big believer in that. And you know, I think it really comes down to timing. Everything has a specific time that it needs to unfold or evolve in your life. And I think at the time, like, music just wasn't the right decision for me at the time. Right. And I think that seeing how everything is played out, like, obviously I wouldn't change anything for the world. And if anything, having a successful career has enabled me to, you know, maybe not be a struggling artist or musician. That is, the common thread for musicianship these days, right? And I'm still able to connect with my passion about, I would say both music and cybersecurity. I would say that things unfolded the way I think they should have. I do wish that I may have not, paused music for 13 years. It's obviously a lot of time that has gone by and passed, but I don't regret it, because I had 13 incredible years without music in my life, at least playing guitar. But I got to build a family, wife and kids, and I'd say that I like where my journey has gone. I like where it's heading, and I've been able to rekindle my excitement and passion for music, which I think is more available to me now than it was back in the day. So I like where it is. I like the journey that I went through. If I had have looked at it, 20 years ago and be like, where am I going? I was the same as I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was all over the place. I wanted to be a lawyer at one point. Again, I wanted to be a virologist, a musician. There was even a time where I wanted to drop everything and go study Shaolin Temple Kung Fu in Asia, and that didn't happen. Unfortunately, I'm not a ninja, but there's many different opportunities and journeys in life. But I think that the one I've lived thus far has been incredible, and I'm happy for the journey that I've taken thus far.
Right on. Well, Mike, really appreciate the thoughtful question and you sharing all your experiences. Now, before we close it out here, I think you got a website, a blog plan. Can you tell everybody where they can stay in touch with you?
Yes. Thanks for that, Frank. So I'm launching my own website very shortly here. It's going to be called CISOmike.com. No weird spelling or anything like that. And really, it's just a place for me to share my thought leadership. And also, I do a lot of speaking engagements, so engaging with me for speaking engagements as well. But really trying to help bring my experience and, I would say innovative thought practices to the masses to help them think of things maybe a little differently, and share my insights as well to help them on their security journey.
All right, excellent. Well, hey, it's crazy that CISO Mike, the domain was actually available. So congrats on finding a good domain. And everybody, you can keep in touch with Mike there. Mike, thank you so much for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Frank. This was a pleasure.